Morning everyone. So today's the day we're going to put the cork panels onto this terrarium. So I've got one piece down here that's 500 ml by 500 ml and some offcuts from when I did the other one, and I'm going to use those to build up the sides. Now I want to try and do something a little bit different if I can, and I want to create a little series of ledges in there. First thing first, let's get everything else fed and sprayed down and stuff. Now it's important to get the measurement right. So I want it between the glass, I want it tight to the glass, so I'm doing the back piece. I want it tight to the glass both sides. What I'm trying to avoid is when I stick the two pieces together, I want them butted up to each other perfectly. I don't want any gaps where frogs could get behind and get trapped. Now what I'm looking for here is 435 ml. So I have tried to mark it, and I'll warn you now, this stuff gets messy, so you might want to do this outside. But if I just put a cut where I want it, which I can just about see, and do the same at the bottom, I do have a little black marker, but it's not great. And you can't see very well on this dark edge. So if we leave that there, and then find the other bit, and then it is literally just a case. It cuts really easy, so I tend to go through it, sort of do a half cut. Oh, I've gone off track there a bit, and again, and then a more profound cut. I'm making a bit of a mess of this, typically on camera, but it leaves a lot of mess anyway. So that's sort of where I was trying to get to. So have a vacuum handy or keep it outside. Now I need to do the height. So what I'm going to do with the height, I want to measure from inside this lip, so it is from the outside, it's the same measure on the back, to just below where my substrate level is going to finish. And for me that's about 335 ml, or 330 I'd probably get away with. Now when I ordered these, I only ordered 2 pieces and they sent me 3, and I think it's because the corner was broken on this bit, so they may have sent me that sort of FOC. So what I'm going to do to measure, you could use a pin or a nail or a couple of nails. So I want 335, and to mark that, what I'm going to do is leave a blade in there, and then do the same at the bottom. Leave a blade in there, and as I say, you can do this with nails. So what will happen when I come to bring my steel rule against that, they're already in place. And then what I'll do, I'll just run through with the blade and keep these pieces. You can keep all the little broken bits that come off as well, if you want to use them for infill and stuff. But let's go and see how well that fits. And obviously it needs to go up to the ceiling, but it's a nice tight fit because I don't want any gaps. So I might need to trim a little bit off that, and obviously it needs to go up on onto the surface. So with that in place, let's cut the boards for the sides then. One thing I was going to say is, before I stick these in, I'm joining 2 pieces together, and make sure that the 2 pieces you join are straight edges, so they come like that sort of out the box. because the bit where it joins the back you can fill, and obviously the front you're going to texture, and we need to get these glued in and get all these textured. So let's tip this over, let's get the glue out and we'll stick this in. So I'm using a HA6 marine grade silicone for this.
So what I'm doing here, it is sped up a little bit, is just doing some isopropyl alcohol wipe first to clean the surfaces. So I'll go over with the isopropyl alcohol, and then once I've gone over with that, I'll go over with the dry cloth so it's all completely clear. After that, then we're putting the silicone onto the boards and just a nice liberal coating. I do some X's on here and then sort of just put a bit on the infill. And then being careful not to get this everywhere, put it into the section you want and press it into place. You can put weights down to hold this down. Same with the sides, so I'm pushing the sides in as far as I can, doing a little bit of a different pattern on these and just making sure I've got them in. Now I did have a big and a small piece for each side, and ended up putting the two big pieces one side and the two small pieces the other side. But I've learned to live with that. It is what it is. I didn't realise till afterwards, so they've been left in play. Just means that one side juts out a bit further than the other, that's all. And we've got a frog chorus to go with this. These are the three shelves that I was on about, so I've cut these out of the remaining cork, and I'm sort of going to glue these into place with a bit of silicone. That's those in place with the silicone, and now we need to texture this. So what I use to texture is just a heavy fork, and we just go over and scrape it. I'm not going to go through this in detail because you guys saw this in the last video that I created. Just work your way through it until you're done.
I've sprayed this cork down this morning, but you can see the sort of shelf effect, the top one being a bit smaller than the others, and that's sort of the texture. Now I have put in the drainage layer and the divider. I still need to put the substrate in. What I want to do next is I want to work on this lid. So at the moment it's full mesh, and I want to sort of close most of that mesh off with a bit of perspex. Let's do that.
So I've taken this mesh out, and underneath, if you flip the lid over, there are corners and these dividing clips, or these retaining clips. And what I want to do is cover sort of 80% of this with perspex and sit that in the groove. Now the perspex I'm using is 2mm, so I need to cut that to size. I've left all the clips in place at this point, so I need to sort of remove them again and put them there for safekeeping, and then drill the holes where the screws were. So I'm going to screw this down into the same holes that it was before. I cut this mesh sort of a little bit bigger than the perspex, and then what I've ended up having to do is put the corners back on, because the corners actually seal this when it sits inside. I had to cut these retaining clips a little bit short because I used 2mm. I needed to I couldn't get the clips back in. So what I've decided to do is seal this with silicone all around the edge, and then where the mesh meets the perspex, run a bead of silicone on the back to glue it down, and there's a bead of silicone on the front. And this is what it'll end up looking like. Now I'm going to seal this around the edges as well. So all the way around the edges and all the way around the side, just to make sure that it's sort of escape proof for flies in the future. And I forgot to film this bit actually. But one thing I wanted to mention was the mesh. Although it's quite thick, I managed to cut that with a sharp pair of scissors.
I'm coming in a few days later, and what I've done is I've put some moss mix on the bottom two of those shelves, and then some Java moss on the top one. So this moss mix I've been growing in tubs. It comes dry, and I've just sort of made it flat in some tubs and had that growing for a while. I've took a small bromeliad from the big tank and put that there, and likewise I've planted a little offshoot of a prayer plant in here. Now the vine that's going up the middle of here is a swell jungle vine, so it's a bendable one. I've just sort of twisted it to make it look nice, and then I've added a rock and a bit of wood in the back. Now I am picking up some plants on Saturday, but they will be sort of climbing plants, so they'll be tucked nice in against the top. And what I'll probably do is I'll probably make a central structure with that bit of rock and wood, probably glue them together and sort of make them look like one piece. But I don't know yet. I am currently housing some new tadpoles, so we've got some more epilobated Antonii on the 21st of the 1st and a single Phyllobates vittatus. So I'm just housing those in here for now. I still need to add a misting system, and my siliconing skills leave a lot to be desired. Now I believe that this mesh isn't good enough for flies, so I've got to have a think about what I'm going to do with that. So small flies, I think, can escape from here, as they can in this. So I'm going to have to put some form of mesh across these just to sort of stop the flies escaping and stuff. But so other than that, it's doing good. I haven't put leaf litter down yet either, and I'm waiting today for my black film to arrive and some nozzles for a misting system.
Saturday's arrived. We're at the Plant Pot Garden Centre in Lichfield, and literally as you go through the entrance you hook a left and there you've got the Terrarium Hut. So it's a small shed. He does some rare terrarium plants and sells bits for terrariums and stuff, but lovely guy, has some fantastic plants in. So this is his sort of rejects cabinet, and all he's doing here is just sort of selling these off cheap. Most of them will pick up, and then in the next cabinet he's got his sort of top stuff, and straight away I spotted a brom that I wanted in here. So what I've picked up off him are a couple of cuttings of Macravias and one of these bromeliads. So only a small little shop. He doesn't house loads in the winter because he has to take them home due to the temperature drops, but sells all sorts of jars and bits and pieces, cork logs, cork branches, and various sort of botanicals and clay pebbles and everything you need for terrarium really. So this is what we've got. We've got a cutting of Macravia umbellata red. We've got Macravia species bronze, some a Nerogelia agnus with a little offset, and in the background you can just see a bit of live sphagnum moss. So moving into the room then, I have now fitted a misting system. I still need to do something with the mesh at the top. I fitted 2 nozzles in each, but they're not right at the front, they're a little bit back.
So what I've been told with these umbellatas is to just leave them on the sphagnum, potentially bring the sphagnum a bit further back. And what I want to do is grow one up this side of the wall. Now notice where the misting nozzle is. So I do hand mist these still, and they don't like being soaked all the time. So they don't mind it every now and then, but they need to dry out. So what I'm going to do is place that somewhere around here, balling up the sphagnum moss towards the base of it. I'm not going to lean it up the wall like most people do. I'm going to lie it flat and let it find its own way up the wall. Something like that, and I'm going to hand mist. So just more for keeping the sphagnum wet than anything, and then I'm going to allow that to dry out. Now I'll do the same with the other one. I'm going to put the other one in the terrarium next to it, and then in this one I think we're going to pin that brom up the back wall. And I've stuffed that bit of sphagnum, that live sphagnum moss, into that branch in the terrarium next to it. Change of plan with the bromeliad, because it was quite rooted well into orchid bark, like in a pot. What I've done is I've put that into my substrate because it's a well draining substrate, and then hopefully what happens is the offshoot will start rooting towards the background. I might sort of twist it in a bit and drop a bit of sphagnum moss around that. I've actually pinned, I don't know if you can see that, a little green pin. So I've actually pinned that offshoot, that offset to the back of the cork for that to sort of stick. But I'll show you the whole terrarium. So ignore the tadpole tubs. We've got our Macravia here, our prayer plant in the back, which I might end up taking out, a brom that I picked up today, a brom from the other terrarium, some moss on the 3 shelves, 3 different types of moss, and that's pretty much it for now. I'm going to sort of leave that, let that settle in, add some insects, add some leaf litter, and see how we go. And if you've enjoyed this build and you're not already a subscriber, make sure you subscribe, hit the like button, drop us a comment, let us know your thoughts, and I'll catch you all on the next one. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.